The early morning tranquility of Maple Street shattered as a sleek black SUV screeched to a halt in front of the Johnson family's modest two-story home. The driver's door flew open and Marcus Johnson emerged, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely contained rage. "That's the last straw!" he roared, slamming the car door with such force that it echoed down the street. Curious neighbors peeked through curtains, drawn by the commotion. Samantha Johnson rushed out of the house, concern etched on her face. "Marcus, what happened?" Their two children, Zoe 14 and Tyler 10, appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. They had never seen their father so upset. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. "It's Henderson," he said through gritted teeth. "That racist piece of, he's gone too far this time." As if on cue, the sound of a lawnmower started up next door. Richard Henderson, a middle-aged white man with a permanent scowl etched on his face, began mowing his perfectly manicured lawn. He shot a smug look at the Johnsons before pointedly turning his back on them. Samantha's eyes narrowed as she noticed something new. "Is that?" Boo," she trailed off, pointing at a garish new sign planted firmly at the edge of Henderson's property, mere inches from their shared property line. "No trespassing!" the sign screamed in bold red letters. Underneath, in slightly smaller text, it read, "Violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Marcus nodded grimly. "That's not even the worst part," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Look at what he did to my car." As the family circled around to the other side of the SUV, collective gasps escaped their lips. A long, jagged scratch ran the entire length of the vehicle, the black paint peeled away to reveal the metal beneath. "But how do you know it was him?" Zoe asked, her voice trembling. Marcus pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking with anger as he pulled up a video. "Because the idiot forgot about my dash cam." Oh. The family huddled around the small screen, watching in disbelief as the footage showed Henderson approaching the parked car in the early hours of the morning, key in hand, a malicious grin on his face as he deliberately scraped it along the SUV's pristine surface. "That's it," Samantha declared, her voice filled with a steely resolve that surprised even Marcus. "We're moving. I don't care where, but we can't live next to this this monster anymore." Tyler's lower lip quivered. "But Mom, what about my friends and my school?" Marcus knelt down, placing a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "Sometimes, buddy, we have to make hard choices to protect our family. But I promise you, wherever we go, it'll be better than this." As the family retreated into their home to begin the daunting task of planning their move, none of them noticed the triumphant smirk on Henderson's face as he continued to mow his lawn, reveling in what he perceived as a victory. Inside, the Johnson family gathered around their dining room table, a map of the city spread out before them. The tension in the room was palpable as they began to discuss potential neighborhoods. "What about Willow Creek?" Samantha suggested, her finger tracing a route to a suburb on the outskirts of town. "I hear they have excellent schools." Marcus shook his head, a faraway look in his eyes. "No, that's not." Not what I had in mind." Zoe looked up from her phone, where she had been researching potential new schools. "Dad, what are you thinking? You've been acting weird ever since we started talking about moving." Marcus exchanged a glance with Samantha, a silent conversation passing between them. She nodded almost imperceptibly, giving him the encouragement he needed. "Kids," Marcus began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been keeping secret for a long time." Tyler's eyes widened. "Are you a spy, Dad?" A chuckle escaped Marcus's lips, breaking the tension momentarily. "No, not a spy, buddy. But, well, remember how I always told you I worked in tech?" Both children nodded, confusion evident on their faces. "Well, that's true, but it's not the whole story," Marcus continued. "You see, a few years ago, I developed an app. A simple thing, really. Just something to help people organize their daily tasks more efficiently. But it took off. Big time." Samantha reached out, squeezing her husband's hand encouragingly. "What do you mean, took off?" Zoe asked, her brow furrowed. Marcus took a deep breath. "I mean, it became one of the most downloaded apps in the world. And last month, a major tech company made an offer to buy it. An offer oh, accepted." Oh. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could almost see the gears turning in his children's minds as they processed this information. "So, we're rich?" Tyler finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, son, we're, very rich." But Zoe's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "But if we're rich, why have we been living here? Why have we put up with Henderson and his racist crap for so long?" "Because money doesn't solve everything, sweetheart," Samantha interjected gently. "Your father and I, we wanted you to grow up understanding the value of hard work, of perseverance in the face of adversity. We wanted you to know what it means to fight for what's right, even when it's hard." Marcus nodded in agreement. "But now I think it's time for a change. Time to show the world, and ourselves, that we won't be defined by the small-mindedness of people like Henderson." He stood up, walking over to a drawer in the living room. When he returned, he was holding a glossy brochure, which he placed in the center of the table. "This," he said, tapping the cover, "is where we're moving." Oh. As the family leaned in to look, gasps of astonishment filled the room. The brochure showcased a stunning mansion, complete with sprawling grounds, a pool that seemed to stretch to the horizon, and every luxury imaginable. But that's in Evergreen Estates," Zoe exclaimed, recognizing the exclusive neighborhood. "That's where all the celebrities and CEOs live." Marcus nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That's right. And soon, it's where we'll live too." As the reality of their situation began to sink in, excitement replaced the tension that had filled the room moments before. Tyler bounced in his seat, peppering his parents with questions about their new home. Zoe's eyes sparkled with the possibilities that lay ahead. But amidst the joy, a seed of something else took root in Marcus's mind. A plan began to form. A plan that would not only give his family the fresh start they deserved, but would also teach Richard Henderson a lesson he would never forget. As night fell on Maple Street, the lights in the Johnson house burned late into the night. Plans were made, dreams were shared, and a new chapter in their lives began to unfold. And next door, blissfully unaware of the seismic shift about to rock his world, Richard Henderson slept soundly, dreaming of a neighborhood free from the family he had tormented for so long. Little did he know, his nightmare was only just beginning. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity for the Johnson family. While Marcus and Samantha worked tirelessly to orchestrate their move in secret, life on Maple Street continued its seemingly normal rhythm. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered and resentments festered. Richard Henderson, emboldened by what he perceived as a victory over the Johnsons, became even more brazen in his harassment. He began hosting loud, raucous parties that lasted well into the night, the music purposefully aimed at the Johnsons' home. When Marcus politely asked him to turn it down, Henderson's response was a sneering, "Why don't you just move if you don't like it?" Little did he know how prophetic those words would prove to be. One sunny Saturday morning, as Henderson meticulously trimmed his hedges, he noticed a moving truck pulling up in front of the Johnsons' house. A triumphant grin spread across his face as he watched movers begin to load boxes and furniture. "Well, well, well," he muttered to himself. "Looks like the trash is finally taking itself out." Oh! Unable to contain his glee, Henderson sauntered over to where Marcus was supervising the movers. "So, finally decided to find a more suitable neighborhood, did you?" Henderson's voice dripped with barely concealed malice. Marcus turned to face his tormentor, a serene smile on his face that caught Henderson off guard. "You could say that, Richard. We found a place that's much more aligned with our values." Henderson's eyes narrowed suspiciously. There was something in Marcus's tone, a hint of, was it amusement? Before he could probe further, Samantha emerged from the house, arms laden with the last of the small boxes. "Oh, hello, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "I do hope you'll enjoy your new neighbors. I hear they're a lovely young couple. Just married, I believe. The husband is a lawyer specializing in civil rights cases, and his wife is a diversity consultant for major corporations. I'm sure you'll all get along splendidly." The color drained from Henderson's face as the implications of Samantha's words sank in. He opened his mouth to retort, but no words came out. Instead, he turned on his heel and stormed back to his own property, slamming the door behind him. As the last of their belongings were loaded onto the truck, the Johnsons gathered on their front lawn for one final look at the home they were leaving behind. Zoe and Tyler, a mixture of excitement and nostalgia in their eyes, hugged their parents tightly. "Ready for our new adventure?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with a confidence that seemed to have been missing in recent months. The family nodded in unison, piling into their car, now repaired, and gleaming in the sunlight, to follow the moving truck to their new home. As they pulled away from Maple Street for the last time, none of them looked back. Across town, in the exclusive gated community of Evergreen Estates, word had already begun to spread about the new family moving in. Rumors flew about the mysterious buyer who had purchased the sprawling mansion at 17 Sycamore Lane, a property that had been on the market for months, its asking price too steep even for the area's wealthy residents. As the Johnsons' car wound its way through the immaculately landscaped streets, they couldn't help but marvel at the opulence surrounding them. Mansions that looked more like small castles lined the roads, each one grander than the last. Finally, they turned onto Sycamore Lane, and there it was, their new home. The photos in the brochure hadn't done it justice. The mansion was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all sleek lines and expansive windows that seemed to bring the outdoors inside. A fountain burbled merrily in the circular driveway, and meticulously manicured gardens stretched as far as the eye could see. As they pulled up to the house, they were greeted by a small welcoming committee, the head of the Evergreen Estates Homeowners Association, flanked by a few curious neighbors. "Welcome to Evergreen Estates," a well-coiffed woman in her 50s exclaimed, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. "I'm Barbara Whitmore, head of the HOA. We're so thrilled to have you join our little community." Marcus shook her hand firmly, noting the barely concealed surprise in Barbara's eyes as she took in the family before her. "Marcus Johnson," he introduced himself. "This is my wife Samantha, and our children Zoe and Tyler. We're excited to be here." As the family made their introductions, Marcus couldn't help but notice the whispers and sidelong glances from some of the other neighbors. He had expected this, of course. Evergreen Estates wasn't known for its diversity, but he also saw genuine warmth in some faces, particularly from a younger couple who introduced themselves as the Changs. "Don't mind some of the old guard," Michael Chang whispered to Marcus as they shook hands. "They'll come around, and if they don't, well, they're lost. We're glad to have you here." As the welcoming committee dispersed and the movers began unloading their belongings, the Johnsons took their first steps into their new home. The interior was even more breathtaking than the exterior. Soaring ceilings, a grand staircase, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the surrounding landscape. Tyler's eyes were as wide as saucers as he took it all in. This is really ours?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Marcus knelt down beside his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It is, buddy. But remember, a house, no matter how big or fancy, is just a building. It's the love and the memories we create inside that make it a home." As the day wore on and their belongings found their new places, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were no longer the Johnsons of Maple Street, struggling to make ends meet and facing daily discrimination. They were now the Johnsons of Evergreen Estates, millionaires with the world at their fingertips. But with this new status came new challenges. As they sat around the dining table that evening, enjoying their first meal in their new home, Samantha broached the subject they had all been thinking about. "So," she began, her tone serious, "how do we want to handle this? Do we tell people about the app? About the money? or do we keep it quiet? Zoe, ever the pragmatist, spoke up first. I think we should be honest, but maybe not broadcast it. People are going to wonder how we afforded this place anyway. Might as well control the narrative. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I agree. We have nothing to be ashamed of. We've worked hard, we've faced adversity, and we've come out on top. That's something to be proud of. But what about our old friends? Tyler asked, his voice small. What if they think we've changed? Samantha reached out, squeezing her son's hand. Real friends will be happy for us, sweetie, and we'll show them that we're still the same people we've always been, just with a bigger house and a few more zeros in our bank account. Oh. As the conversation continued, plans were made. They would be open about their newfound wealth, but emphasize the hard work and innovation that had led to it. They would use their resources to give back to their old community, setting up scholarships and funding after-school programs. And most importantly, they would remain true to themselves and the values that had guided them through the hard times. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as the Johnsons settled into their new life. Zoe and Tyler started at their new schools, initially overwhelmed by the opulence of the private institutions, but quickly finding their footing. Samantha threw herself into redecorating their new home, determined to make it a warm and welcoming space despite its grand scale. Marcus, meanwhile, found himself navigating the complex social dynamics of Evergreen Estates. He joined the country club not out of a desire to fit in, but as a strategic move to network and potentially find investors for his next big idea. It was there, during a charity golf tournament, that he overheard a conversation that would set in motion the next phase of his plan. Did you hear about old Henderson over on Maple Street? One of the golfers, a portly man named Frank, asked his companions. Apparently, he's been making life hell for his neighbors. Real piece of work, that one. Marcus's ears perked up, but he kept his face neutral as he lined up his shot. Another golfer, a silver-haired woman named Estelle, chimed in. Oh, I know all about it. My niece lives a few houses down. Says he's been terrorizing this one family for years. African-American, I believe. Such a shame. In this day and age, you'd think people would know better. Someone ought to teach that old bigot a lesson, Frank grumbled. But what can you do? It's not like we can buy out the whole neighborhood just to get rid of one bad apple. Marcus's golf ball sailed through the air, landing perfectly on the green. As he turned to his companions, a slow smile spread across his face. You know, he said casually, that's not a bad idea at all. Back at home, Marcus shared his encounter with Samantha. Honey, he said, excitement dancing in his eyes, I think I know how we can make a real difference, not just for us, but for everyone back on Maple Street. Oh! Samantha listened intently as Marcus laid out his plan. It was ambitious, perhaps even a little crazy, but the more he talked, the more she found herself nodding along. This wasn't just about revenge on Henderson. It was about creating lasting change, about using their newfound wealth and influence to make a real difference in the world. It's going to take time, Marcus concluded, and a lot of careful planning, but I think we can do it. What do you say? Samantha's response was to pull her husband into a fierce embrace. I say let's do it, she whispered. Let's show Henderson and the world what real power looks like. As the Johnsons began to put their plan into motion, life in Evergreen Estates continued to evolve around them. They quickly became known as the family who threw the best parties, lavish affairs that somehow managed to feel warm and inclusive despite the opulent setting. It was at one of these parties that Zoe overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Two of her classmates, thinking they were out of earshot, were gossiping by the pool. I heard they used to live in some dumpy neighborhood, one girl said, her voice dripping with disdain. Can you imagine? They probably don't even know how to use half the stuff in this house. Oh. Her companion giggled. I know, right? My mom says we should be nice to them because they're new money, whatever that means. But honestly, they don't belong here. Zoe felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of anger and shame. She was about to confront the girls when she felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Michael Chang, the neighbor who had welcomed them on their first day. "Don't let them get to you," he said softly. "People like that. They're so focused on looking down on others that they miss out on all the good stuff in life. Your family? You're the real deal. Don't ever forget that." Zoe nodded, blinking back tears. As she watched Michael rejoin the party, she made a decision. She wouldn't just stand by and let people talk about her family that way. It was time to show Evergreen Estates and the world exactly who the Johnsons were. The next day, Zoe approached her parents with an idea. "I want to start a blog," she announced, "about our family, about where we came from, and about what we're doing now. I want to tell our story, the real story." Marcus and Samantha exchanged a glance, pride shining in their eyes. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Samantha said. "But are you sure you're ready for that kind of attention?" Zoe nodded firmly. "I'm sure. We've got nothing to be ashamed of, right? So let's own our narrative. Besides," she added with a grin, "it'll be good practice for when I become a famous journalist." And so, the Johnson Journey was born. Zoe's blog quickly gained traction, her honest, heartfelt posts resonating with readers far beyond Evergreen Estates. She wrote about the challenges they'd faced on Maple Street, about the excitement and uncertainty of their sudden wealth, and about their determination to use their new position to make a difference. As Zoe's blog grew in popularity, it caught the attention of local media. Soon, the Johnsons found themselves at the center of a feel-good story that captured the imagination of the entire city. "From rags to riches, the family that's giving back," read one headline. "Tech millionaire's mission to transform his old neighborhood," proclaimed another. The attention wasn't always comfortable. Marcus and Samantha had to field countless calls from old acquaintances suddenly eager to reconnect. But it served a purpose. With each interview, each public appearance, they were able to shine a light on the issues that mattered to them. They spoke about the importance of education, about the need for more diversity in tech, and about their plans to invest in communities like the one they'd left behind. And all the while, behind the scenes, Marcus's plan was taking shape. He hired a team of real estate experts, tasking them with quietly buying up properties on and around Maple Street. It was a delicate operation. They needed to acquire enough land to make a difference, but not so much that it would raise suspicions or drive up prices. As the months passed, the Johnsons settled into a rhythm in their new life. Tyler joined the school's robotics club, quickly becoming one of its star members. Samantha, inspired by their journey, started a mentorship program for aspiring entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds. And Marcus, when he wasn't working on his secret project, threw himself into developing new apps and technologies, each one designed to make people's lives a little bit easier. But they never forgot where they came from. Every Sunday, without fail, they would pile into the car and drive back to their old neighborhood. They'd attend services at their old church, have lunch at their favorite local restaurant, and catch up with friends and neighbors. It was their way of staying grounded, of remembering who they were and where they'd come from. It was during one of these Sunday visits that they ran into Henderson for the first time since their move. He was coming out of the local grocery store, looking older and more haggard than they remembered. When he saw the Johnsons, his face twisted into a familiar sneer. "Well, look who it is," he spat. "Come to show off how well you're doing? Rub our noses in it?" Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "No, Mr. Henderson. We're here because this is our community. It always will be, no matter where we live." Henderson's face reddened. "You don't belong here anymore," he hissed. "Why don't you go back to your mansion and leave us normal folks alone?" Before Marcus could respond, a voice called out from across the street. "Speak for yourself, Richard." It was Mrs. Rodriguez, their former next-door neighbor. She hurried over, enveloping Samantha in a warm hug. "We miss you all so much," she said. "The neighborhood hasn't been the same since you left." As a small crowd began to gather, greeting the Johnsons with smiles and hugs, Henderson slunk away, muttering under his breath. But Marcus watched him go with a glint in his eye. Soon, he thought, soon everything would change. Back in Evergreen Estates, the Johnsons' influence continued to grow. They hosted charity galas, sponsored local events, and slowly but surely began to change the culture of their new community. The whispers and sidelong glances of their early days were replaced by genuine warmth and respect. Even Barbara Whitmore, the initially frosty HOA president, had come around. "I must admit," she confessed to Samantha during a neighborhood barbecue, "when you first moved in, I had my reservations. But you've brought so much life to this place. I can't imagine Evergreen Estates without the Johnsons now." "But—" Samantha smiled, clinking her glass against Barbara's. "We're just getting started," she said. "Just wait and see what we do next." As summer turned to fall, Marcus's plan entered its final stages. He had successfully acquired over 60% of the properties in and around Maple Street, all through various shell companies and intermediaries. Now it was time for the big reveal. He called a press conference, inviting media outlets from across the city. The air was thick with anticipation as Marcus took the podium, Samantha and the children standing proudly beside him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice steady and confident, "I stand before you today not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as a man who remembers where he came from. Today, I'm excited to announce the launch of the Maple Street Renaissance Project." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Marcus continued. "Over the past few months, we've quietly acquired a majority of the properties in and around Maple Street. Our goal? To transform this neglected area into a model community, one that embraces diversity, fosters innovation, and provides opportunities for all its residents." As Marcus outlined the details of the project, affordable housing, a state-of-the-art community center, green spaces, and a technology incubator, the excitement in the room was palpable. Reporters furiously scribbled notes, cameras flashed, and social media exploded with the news. "But this isn't just about building new structures," Marcus emphasized. "It's about building a new future. We're not pushing anyone out. Current residents will have the option to stay in upgraded homes at their current rent rates. This is about lifting everyone up, not just a select few." As the press conference concluded, Marcus was swarmed by reporters eager for more details. But his eyes were fixed on a television in the corner of the room, where a local news station was already running the story. The camera panned across Maple Street, eventually focusing on a familiar face, Richard Henderson, looking shell-shocked as he stood in front of his house. Back on Maple Street, the atmosphere was electric. News of the Maple Street Renaissance Project spread like wildfire, and residents gathered in small groups on front lawns and porches, discussing the implications of this stunning development. Mrs. Rodriguez, the Johnsons' former neighbor, was practically dancing with joy. "I knew it," she exclaimed to anyone who would listen. "I knew the Johnsons wouldn't forget about us. This is going to change everything." Not everyone was as thrilled, however. Richard Henderson stood on his front porch, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. As reporters approached him for comment, he retreated inside, slamming the door behind him. Over the next few weeks, the Johnsons found themselves at the center of a media storm. Zoe's blog traffic exploded as people clamored for insider information about the project. Tyler became a minor celebrity at school, with classmates peppering him with questions about his family's plans. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Some critics accused Marcus of engaging in gentrification, despite his promises to protect current residents. Others questioned his motives, suggesting this was more about revenge against Henderson than genuine community improvement. Marcus and Samantha faced these challenges head-on, meeting with community leaders, holding town halls, and tirelessly explaining their vision. Slowly but surely, skepticism gave way to cautious optimism. As the initial plans for the Maple Street Renaissance Project were unveiled, excitement continued to build. The proposed community center would house a library, a cutting-edge computer lab, and spaces for art and music programs. The affordable housing units were designed by a renowned architect, blending seamlessly with the neighborhood's existing character while providing modern amenities. But perhaps the most talked-about feature was the technology incubator. Marcus envisioned it as a place where local entrepreneurs could access resources, mentorship, and potential investors. "I was lucky," he often said in interviews. My app took off, but so many brilliant ideas never see the light of day because people lack the resources to develop them. We're going to change that. As construction began, the Johnsons made a point of being present on Maple Street regularly. They wanted to be hands-on, to show that this wasn't just some remote project for them, but a labor of love. It was during one of these visits that they had their first face-to-face confrontation with Henderson since the project was announced. They were walking down the street discussing plans with the project manager when Henderson emerged from his house, his face contorted with rage. "You think you can just waltz in here and buy us all out?" he shouted, storming towards them. "This is our neighborhood, not your personal playground." Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Henderson, nobody's being bought out or forced to leave. We're investing in this community, making it better for everyone, including you, if you'd let us." Henderson's face reddened. "I don't need your charity," he spat. "And I don't need you bringing more of your kind into this neighborhood." A hush fell over the street as neighbors who had gathered to watch the confrontation collectively held their breath. Samantha placed a restraining hand on Marcus's arm, but to everyone's surprise, it was Zoe who spoke up. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness, "I've lived on this street my whole life. I've seen how you've treated people who are different from you. But here's the thing. This project isn't about you. It's not even about us. It's about making things better for everyone. Why can't you see that?" Henderson opened his mouth to retort, but no words came out. For a moment, he looked old and tired, the fight seeming to drain out of him. Without another word, he turned and shuffled back to his house. As the Johnsons watched him go, Marcus put an arm around Zoe's shoulders. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," he said softly. "You spoke up for what's right. That's what this is all about." The confrontation with Henderson marked a turning point. While he remained a vocal critic of the project, his support in the neighborhood began to wane. More and more residents were won over by the Johnsons' vision and their genuine commitment to the community. As months passed, the Maple Street Renaissance project began to take shape. The community center rose from the ground, its modern lines a stark contrast to the older homes around it. The first block of affordable housing units was completed, and families moved in, their faces beaming with pride as they gave tours to friends and relatives. The technology incubator, housed in a converted warehouse at the end of Maple Street, quickly became a hub of activity. Local entrepreneurs, many of whom had never dreamed of having access to such resources, flocked to the space. Within months, the first success story emerged. A young woman from the neighborhood who developed an app to connect elderly residents with volunteer helpers. Throughout it all, the Johnsons remained deeply involved. They were a constant presence on Maple Street, rolling up their sleeves to help with community cleanup days, tutoring at the new learning center, and hosting barbecues for the construction workers. Their dedication did not go unnoticed. One evening, as they were leaving a community meeting, they were approached by an elderly man they recognized as Mr. Thompson, one of the longest-standing residents of Maple Street. "You know," Mr. Thompson said, his voice gruff, but his eyes twinkling, "when you folks first moved away, I thought we'd lost something special. But now I see you didn't leave us at all. You just went away for a bit, so you could come back and make things better for all of us." Samantha felt tears prick her eyes as she squeezed the old man's hand. "This will always be home," she said softly. As the project neared its first-year milestone, the transformation of Maple Street was undeniable. The once-neglected neighborhood now bustled with activity. Children played in the new park. The community center hosted classes and events daily. And there was a palpable sense of pride among the residents. Even some of the project's harshest critics had come around. Barbara Whitmore, the HOA president from Evergreen Estates, had become one of its most vocal supporters, often bringing potential investors to tour the incubator. But one holdout remained. Richard Henderson's house stood out like a sore thumb amidst the revitalized neighborhood. Paint peeling, lawn overgrown, it was a stark reminder of the old Maple Street. One day, as Marcus was overseeing the installation of a new playground, he noticed Henderson watching from his porch. On an impulse, he walked over. "Mr. "Henderson," he called out, "I know we've had our differences, but I want you to know there's still a place for you here. If you'd like, we could help fix up your house, maybe get you involved in some of the programs at the community center. What do you say?" For a long moment, Henderson said nothing, his roomy eyes fixed on Marcus. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. Henderson didn't suddenly become a changed man overnight, but it was a start. And as Marcus walked back to the playground, he couldn't help but smile. This, he thought, was what true victory looked like. As the sun set on Maple Street, casting long shadows across the new buildings and renovated homes, the Johnson family stood together, surveying all they had accomplished. "You know," Marcus said, pulling Samantha close, "when we left here, I thought we were leaving our old life behind. But really, we were just finding a new way to come home." "Oh," Zoe, who had been furiously typing on her phone, looked up with a grin. "Well, Dad, I hope you're ready for the next chapter. My blog just got picked up by a major publisher. They want to turn it into a book. The Johnson Journey, from Maple Street to Millionaires and Back Again." As the family erupted in cheers and laughter, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. From the targets of a racist neighbor to the catalysts for community-wide change, their journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. But as he looked around at the thriving neighborhood, at the faces of longtime residents now filled with hope and pride, he knew that the real story wasn't about the Johnsons at all. It was about Maple Street itself, its resilience, its spirit, and its unwavering sense of community. As night fell and lights began to twinkle in windows up and down the street, Marcus knew that their journey was far from over. There would be new challenges to face, new battles to fight. But standing here, surrounded by his family and the community they'd helped to transform, he was ready for whatever came next. Because sometimes, the best way to move forward is to come back home. As the Maple Street Renaissance Project entered its second year, the transformation of the neighborhood was nothing short of miraculous. The once neglected streets now bustled with activity, filled with a diverse mix of longtime residents and newcomers alike. The community center had become the beating heart of the area, offering everything from coding classes for kids to financial literacy workshops for adults. But amidst the success, a storm was brewing. It began with whispers, then grew into murmurs, and finally erupted into a full-blown controversy. A group of wealthy investors, eyeing the success of Maple Street, had begun buying up properties in the surrounding areas. Their plan? To create a luxury corridor that would effectively wall off Maple Street from the rest of the city. The news hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He had poured his heart and soul into revitalizing his old neighborhood, only to find that his success might now be used as a tool for further gentrification and segregation. "This can't be happening," he muttered, pacing the length of his home office. Samantha watched him with concern, her own face creased with worry. "What are we going to do?" she asked softly. Marcus stopped pacing, his jaw set in determination. "We fight," he said simply. "We've come too far to let them destroy everything we've built." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus mobilized his team, reaching out to city officials, community leaders, and even his contacts in the media. Zoe's blog became a rallying point for supporters, with her passionate posts about the importance of inclusive communities going viral. But their opponents were powerful and well-connected. The leader of the investment group, a slick businessman named Victor Caldwell, launched a PR campaign painting the luxury corridor as a natural evolution of the area's development. "We're simply building on the fantastic work Mr. Johnson has done," Caldwell said in a televised interview, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Maple Street has shown what's possible in urban renewal. We're just taking it to the next level." Marcus knew he needed a bold move to counter Caldwell's narrative. After days of brainstorming with Samantha and his team, he came up with a plan that was audacious, risky, but potentially game-changing. He called for a town hall meeting, inviting residents from Maple Street and the surrounding areas, as well as city officials and members of the media. The community center's main hall was packed to capacity, with people spilling out into the hallways. As Marcus took the stage, a hush fell over the crowd. He looked out at the sea of faces. Faces of people he'd grown up with. Faces of newcomers who'd bought into his vision. And even a few faces from his new life in Evergreen Estates. "Friends, neighbors, members of the press," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "We stand at a crossroads. The success we've achieved here on Maple Street is being used as an excuse to further divide our city. But I'm here to tell you that we have the power to choose a different path." He paused, taking a deep breath before dropping his bombshell. "Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Maple Street Community Land Trust. I will be transferring ownership of all the properties acquired through the Renaissance Project to this trust. This land will be held in perpetuity for the benefit of the community, ensuring that Maple Street remains diverse, affordable, and true to its roots for generations to come." A gasp rippled through the audience, followed by a burst of applause. But Marcus wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm pledging an additional $50 million to expand our model to the surrounding areas. We'll work with residents and local leaders to create more affordable housing, more green spaces, and more opportunities for small businesses. We're not just defending Maple Street. We're growing our vision of an inclusive, thriving community." The room erupted in cheers, but as Marcus scanned the crowd, his eyes locked with Richard Henderson's. The old man sat in the back, his face an unreadable mask. For a moment, Marcus wondered if he'd finally gone too far, if this would be the push that sent Henderson completely over the edge. But then, almost imperceptibly, Henderson nodded. It wasn't approval, not quite, but it was. Something. Acknowledgement, perhaps. Or maybe, just maybe, the beginnings of understanding. As Marcus stepped down from the stage, he was immediately swarmed by supporters and media. But over the sea of bodies, he caught sight of Victor Caldwell slipping out of the room, his face thunderous. The battle, Marcus knew, was far from over. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Marcus's announcement had sparked a citywide debate about urban development and community rights. The Maple Street model was being hailed as a potential blueprint for ethical urban renewal across the country. But Caldwell and his investors weren't going down without a fight. They launched a series of legal challenges, claiming that the Community Land Trust was an unfair restriction on the free market. They lobbied city officials, arguing that their luxury development would bring in much-needed tax revenue. The pressure was intense, and Marcus found himself working around the clock to counter each new attack. The stress began to take its toll, not just on him, but on his entire family. One night, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and interviews, Marcus came home to find Samantha waiting up for him, her face etched with concern. "Marcus," she said softly, "we need to talk." His heart sank. "What's wrong?" Samantha took a deep breath. "It's the kids. Zoe's grades are slipping, and Tyler. He's been getting into fights at school. They're worried about you, about all of this. We all are." Marcus felt as if the wind had been knocked out of him. In his determination to save Maple Street, had he been neglecting his own family? "I'm sorry," he whispered, pulling Samantha into a tight embrace. "I've been so focused on fighting this battle, I didn't realize." Samantha pulled back, looking into his eyes. "We believe in what you're doing, Marcus. We all do, but we need you too. We need to find a balance." Marcus nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. "You're right, and I think I know how we can do that." The next day, Marcus called a family meeting. "I've been thinking," he began, looking at each of his family members in turn. "This fight for Maple Street, it's not just my fight, it's ours, and I think it's time we approached it that way." He turned to Zoe. "Sweetheart, your blog has been incredibly powerful. How would you feel about taking a more active role in our community outreach? You have a way of connecting with people that I never could." Zoe's eyes lit up. "Really? You'd let me do that?" Marcus nodded, then turned to Tyler. "And buddy, I was thinking, how would you like to start a youth council for Maple Street? We need to hear from the young people in the community, too, and I can't think of anyone better to lead that charge. Tyler sat up straighter, a grin spreading across his face. That would be awesome, Dad. Finally, Marcus looked at Samantha. And you, my love, you've always been the heart of this family. How about you take the lead on our education initiatives? Your experience as a teacher would be invaluable. Samantha squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. I'd be honored. As the family began to excitedly discuss their new roles, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This was how it should be. Not him against the world, but his family, united in a common cause. The new approach brought fresh energy to their campaign. Zoe's heartfelt blog posts and social media updates helped humanize the struggle, putting faces and stories to the statistics. Tyler's youth council brought a wave of young voices into the conversation, highlighting the long-term impact of the decisions being made. Samantha's education initiatives became a cornerstone of their community development plan, with her proposal for a state-of-the-art charter school on Maple Street gaining widespread support. But it was a chance encounter that would prove to be the turning point in their fight against Caldwell and his investors. One evening, as Marcus was leaving a city council meeting, he quite literally ran into Richard Henderson in the parking lot. Papers went flying, and as both men knelt to gather them, Marcus was surprised to see detailed notes on zoning laws and community land trusts. Mr. Henderson, Marcus said cautiously, I didn't expect to see you here. Henderson straightened up, his face its usual scowl, but there was something different in his eyes. Yeah, well, he grumbled, someone's got to make sure you don't mess this up. Marcus blinked in surprise. I'm sorry? Henderson sighed heavily. Look, Johnson, I don't like you. Probably never will. But what you're doing for the neighborhood. It's not half bad. And I'll be damned if I let some smooth-talking city slicker like Caldwell undo it all. For a moment, Marcus was speechless. Then slowly he extended his hand. Mr. Henderson. Richard. I think this might be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Henderson snorted, but he shook Marcus's hand firmly. Don't push it, Johnson. But, maybe we can work together on this one. But the unlikely alliance between Marcus and Henderson proved to be the final piece of the puzzle. Henderson's deep knowledge of the neighborhood's history and his connections with some of the old-timer residents helped shore up support in areas where Marcus had struggled. As the date for the final city council vote on Caldwell's proposal approached, the momentum was clearly shifting in Maple Street's favor. Caldwell, sensing defeat, made one last desperate move. He approached Marcus with an offer, a massive buyout that would make the Johnsons wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. All they had to do was step aside and let the luxury corridor project proceed. For a brief, fleeting moment, Marcus was tempted. The amount of money Caldwell was offering could set his family up for generations. They could travel the world, never worry about anything again. But then he thought about Maple Street, about Mrs. Rodriguez and her famous empanadas, about Mr. Thompson and his stories of the neighborhood's history, about the kids in Tyler's youth council, their eyes shining with hope for the future. Marcus looked Caldwell in the eye and said simply, no. Caldwell's face contorted with rage. You'll regret this, Johnson. I'll make sure of it. But Marcus just smiled. No, Mr. Caldwell, I don't think I will. The day of the city council vote dawned bright and clear. The chambers were packed, with supporters from Maple Street filling every available seat and spilling out into the hallways. As the council members took their seats, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Richard Henderson, looking uncomfortable in a suit that had seen better days. You ready for this, Johnson? Henderson asked gruffly. Marcus nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. The debate was heated, with Caldwell's team presenting slick projections of increased tax revenue and economic growth. But when it was Maple Street's turn to present, something unexpected happened. Instead of Marcus taking the podium, it was Zoe who stepped up. Her voice shook slightly as she began, but gained strength with every word. Members of the council, distinguished guests, I stand before you not just as Marcus Johnson's daughter, but as a child of Maple Street. I've seen our neighborhood at its worst, and now at its best. The transformation we've undergone isn't just about new buildings or programs. It's about hope. It's about community. It's about proving that we can grow and thrive without leaving anyone behind." As Zoe spoke, sharing stories of the lives changed and the community bonds strengthened, Marcus saw something he never thought he'd witness: tears in Richard Henderson's eyes. When the vote finally came, it was unanimous. Caldwell's luxury corridor project was rejected, and the Maple Street Community Land Trust was officially recognized and protected by city ordinance. The chambers erupted in cheers. Marcus found himself engulfed in a sea of hugs, from his family, from neighbors, even from city council members. But the embrace that meant the most came from Henderson. "You did good, Johnson," the old man said gruffly, quickly stepping back as if embarrassed by the show of emotion. "Your folks would have been proud." As they left City Hall, stepping out into the bright sunlight, Marcus felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had faced seemingly insurmountable odds and emerged victorious. Maple Street was safe, its future secure. But more than that, they had shown what was possible when a community came together, when people put aside their differences and worked towards a common goal. As the family drove back to Maple Street, where a celebration was already underway, Marcus looked at each of his loved ones in turn. Samantha, her eyes shining with pride. Zoe, excitedly checking the reactions to her speech on social media. Tyler, already planning the next youth council meeting. He thought about the journey that had brought them here. From the day they'd fled Henderson's harassment to the moment they'd stood side by side with him to save their community. It had been a long, difficult road, full of unexpected twists and turns. But as they turned onto Maple Street, seeing the banners and smiling faces of their neighbors, Marcus knew one thing for certain: they were home, and there was nowhere else he'd rather be. The celebration on Maple Street lasted well into the night. The entire neighborhood had come out in force, with tables groaning under the weight of potluck dishes, music filling the air, and laughter echoing down the streets. It was more than just a victory party. It was a reaffirmation of community, a testament to the bonds that had been forged and strengthened through their shared struggle. As the night wore on, Marcus found a quiet moment to slip away. He wandered down the street, taking in the sights and sounds of the neighborhood he'd fought so hard to protect. The new community center stood proud, its windows glowing warmly. The refurbished houses, once showing signs of neglect, now gleamed with fresh paint and care. And everywhere there were people, talking, laughing, simply enjoying each other's company. He paused in front of his old house, now occupied by a young family. The father, noticing Marcus, waved him over. "Mr. Johnson, we can't thank you enough for everything you've done," the man said, shaking Marcus's hand enthusiastically. "When we moved here, we were just looking for an affordable place to live. We never imagined we'd find a real community." Marcus smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "That's what Maple Street has always been about," he replied. "I'm just glad we could preserve that spirit." As he continued his walk, Marcus found himself in front of Richard Henderson's house. To his surprise, the old man was sitting on his porch, watching the festivities from a distance. After a moment's hesitation, Marcus approached. "Mind if I join you?" he asked cautiously. Henderson grunted, which Marcus took as an invitation. He sat down on the porch steps, and for a while the two men sat in silence, watching the celebration unfold before them. Finally, Henderson spoke. "You know, Johnson, when you first moved onto this street all those years ago, I was convinced you'd be the ruin of this neighborhood." He paused, his rheumy eyes fixed on the scene before them. "Never been so glad to be wrong in my life." Marcus turned to look at the old man, seeing him truly for the first time. Behind the gruff exterior and years of prejudice, he saw someone who, in his own misguided way, had thought he was protecting his home. "It's never too late to change, Mr. Henderson," Marcus said softly. "You proved that today." Henderson harumphed, but there was no real heat in it. "Don't go getting sentimental on me now, Johnson. I still think your music's too loud." Marcus laughed, and after a moment, Henderson joined in. It wasn't quite friendship, but it was a start. As the weeks passed, life on Maple Street settled into a new rhythm. The Community Land Trust began its work in earnest, with residents taking an active role in shaping the neighborhood's future. Zoe's blog had transformed into a full-fledged community newsletter, sharing stories of local heroes and keeping everyone informed about upcoming events and initiatives. Tyler's Youth Council had become a model for other neighborhoods, with kids taking the lead on everything from organizing cleanup drives to planning intergenerational activities. And Samantha's charter school proposal had been approved, with construction set to begin in the coming months. But perhaps the most surprising development came from Richard Henderson. One day, he showed up at the community center looking uncomfortable but determined. "I want to volunteer," he announced gruffly to a startled Marcus. "Figure if I'm going to live in this new Maple Street, I might as well be a part of it." And so, Richard Henderson, once the neighborhood's most notorious racist, found himself teaching a class on local history to a diverse group of eager listeners. It wasn't always smooth sailing. Old habits die hard, and there were moments of tension. But with each passing week, the edges of his prejudice seemed to soften a little more. As for the Johnsons, they found themselves navigating a new reality. Their success had brought opportunities and challenges they never could have imagined. Marcus was inundated with invitations to speak at conferences and consult on urban renewal projects across the country. Samantha's educational initiatives were gaining national attention, but through it all, they remained grounded in the community they had helped to build. They made a point of attending every neighborhood potluck, cheering at every Little League game, and pitching in for every community project. Their mansion in Evergreen Estates, once a symbol of their escape from Maple Street, now stood empty more often than not. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table in their old Maple Street home, which they had repurchased and renovated as a second residence, Zoe broached a subject that had been on all their minds. "Mom, Dad," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking, do we really need the house in Evergreen Estates anymore? I mean, we're here all the time anyway." "Oh." Marcus and Samantha exchanged a look. They had been having the same conversation in private for weeks. "You know," Marcus said slowly, "I think you might be onto something, sweetheart. This has always been our real home." "Oh." The decision to sell their Evergreen Estates mansion and move back to Maple Street full-time was met with overwhelming support from the community. The day the Johnsons moved back in, they found their neighbors had organized a surprise welcome home party. As Marcus stood on his front porch, looking out at the faces of his neighbors, faces of all colors, ages, and backgrounds, he felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun with a hateful act had led them here, to a place of understanding, growth, and true community. But the story of Maple Street was far from over. The success of their Community Land Trust model had attracted attention from cities across the country. Delegations of urban planners, community organizers, and local officials began to make pilgrimages to Maple Street, eager to learn from their experience. Marcus found himself in demand as a speaker and consultant, sharing the Maple Street story and helping other communities implement similar models. But he always made sure to bring others along. Samantha to speak about education, Zoe to discuss youth engagement, and even Richard Henderson to talk about the importance of overcoming prejudice. 5 years after the defeat of Caldwell's luxury corridor plan, Maple Street hosted a national conference on inclusive urban development. As Marcus stood on the stage of the community center, preparing to give the keynote address, he looked out at the packed auditorium. In the front row sat his family, Samantha, Zoe, and Tyler, all beaming with pride. Next to them was Richard Henderson, looking uncomfortable in a suit but sitting tall. And behind them were the faces of his neighbors, the people who had fought alongside him to save their community. As Marcus began to speak, sharing the story of Maple Street's transformation, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and often difficult, but it had led them to this moment, a moment where their little neighborhood stood as a beacon of hope for communities across the nation. The story of Maple Street, Marcus concluded, his voice ringing out clear and strong, is not just about urban renewal or affordable housing. It's about the power of community. It's about what can happen when we choose to see the best in each other, when we stand together in the face of adversity, when we dare to dream of a better future for all of us. Oh! As applause filled the room, Marcus knew that this was not an ending, but a beginning. The work would continue. There would be new challenges to face and new battles to fight. But looking out at the faces before him, faces filled with hope and determination, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. For that was the true magic of Maple Street. Not the renovated houses or the new community center, not the accolades or the national attention. The magic of Maple Street was in its people, in their resilience, their compassion, and their unwavering belief in the power of community. As Marcus stepped down from the podium, enveloped in the embraces of his family and neighbors, he knew one thing for certain. This was home, and there was nowhere else in the world he'd rather be. The legacy of Maple Street would continue to grow, inspiring change and fostering hope for generations to come. And at the heart of that legacy would always be the story of a family who dared to dream, a community that refused to be divided, and a neighborhood that proved that love and understanding could overcome even the deepest prejudices. In the end, the unexpected move that had once seemed like an escape had become a journey home, not just for the Johnsons, but for every resident of Maple Street. Together, they had built something truly extraordinary, a community where everyone belonged, where everyone had value, and where the American dream was alive and well, accessible to all. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. The occasion was the unveiling of a new monument, a symbol of the community's commitment to justice and equality. Walter, looking frail but determined, sat in a place of honor, Marcus standing proudly behind him. As the mayor spoke of progress and ongoing commitment to reform, Walter's eyes roamed the crowd. He saw faces of all colors, ages, and backgrounds. He saw some of the young people from Marcus's leadership program standing tall and attentive. He saw Officer Carter in civilian clothes, standing somewhat apart but listening intently. And then, as the monument was unveiled, a hush fell over the crowd. It was a simple yet powerful design. Two hands clasped together, one old and weathered, one young and strong. At the base, a plaque read, "In honor of Walter Jones and all those who stand for justice. May we never forget that the power to create change lies within each of us." As applause erupted, Walter felt a tug on his sleeve. He looked down to see Jamal, the young boy from the day of the hearing, now standing a little taller, his eyes shining with purpose. "Mr. Jones," Jamal said, his voice filled with determination, "I've been thinking about what you said, about being strong and brave. I've decided I want to be a police officer when I grow up. But not like the old ones. I want to be the kind of officer that helps people, that makes them feel safe." Walter felt his heart swell with emotion. He reached out, placing a gnarled hand on Jamal's shoulder. "That's a noble goal, son," he said softly, "and I have no doubt you'll achieve it." As Jamal beamed and ran back to his parents, Walter turned to Marcus. "You know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "when I was lying on the ground that day, with those officers standing over me, I never could have imagined this. All of this." Marcus nodded, blinking back tears. "You showed us all what one person can do, Dad. You showed us the power of standing up, of speaking out." Walter shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "No, son, I just lit the spark. It was all of us together that turned it into a flame. And now, he gestured to the crowd, to the monument, to the city beyond. "Now it's up to all of us to keep that flame burning." As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, many stopped to shake Walter's hand, to thank him, to share their own stories of inspiration and change. And Walter, despite his fatigue, listened to each one, understanding that his story had become part of something much larger than himself. The sun was setting as Walter and Marcus finally left the park, walking slowly down the same street where everything had started a year ago. But now, instead of fear and suspicion, They were met with waves and warm greetings from neighbors and passers-by. As they reached Walter's home, they paused on the porch, looking out at the neighborhood bathed in the golden light of sunset. The street was alive with the sounds of children playing, of neighbors chatting, of a community united. "We've come a long way," Marcus said softly. Walter nodded, his eyes distant, seeing not just the present, but the long arc of history that had led to this moment. "We have," he agreed. "But the journey isn't over. It's up to all of us to keep moving forward, to keep pushing for justice and equality. Not just here, but everywhere." As they stood there, an old man and his son, heroes to some but simply father and son to each other, the weight of their journey settled around them. They had faced injustice and had emerged not just victorious, but as catalysts for change. The story of Walter Jones, the decorated veteran who stood tall in the face of injustice, would be told for generations to come. But more than that, it would serve as a reminder of the power of one person to spark a movement, of the strength found in community, and of the ongoing struggle for justice and equality that defines the human experience. As night fell and stars began to twinkle in the sky above, Walter and Marcus went inside, ready to rest and prepare for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. For they knew that while their battle had been won, the fight for true equality and justice was far from over. But with each small victory, with each mind changed and heart opened, they moved one step closer to the world they dreamed of, a world of true equality, respect, and justice for all.